Going around. I have a few more up here in case people don't have them. Have it. There's another handout that I haven't handed out just yet, but I will. I think. We'll see. Okay, so welcome all. This is, people hear me okay?
Yes.
This is, I guess, what I would hope to be one of several information sessions that have to do with what I call the current state of Berlin-Boylston Public Schools. And the intent for tonight, I want to be really clear about this, the intent for tonight is not about decision making. The intent for tonight is really to make sure that you folks understand the way things are, the current state, the structure. I keep referring to it as the organizational structure. I tried as best as I could to be objective, to try to not put in some of my innermost feelings into the slides. So I hope that I did that, because it's really important that this is about information for you. Because really the decision about what happens to the Berlin-Boylston Public Schools needs to be in your hands. Now, the school committee owns the responsibility for making the decision, school committees. But the schools and the school committees really own their responsibility to you, the community. Okay? So what you need to do, what I think you need to do first and foremost is understand the way things are and how things are. So again, multiple meetings, there's lots of information about the way things are. There's a ton of history that I didn't put in at all. A little bit of history. That in some cases is important, in other cases it really isn't, because it's really about moving forward. It's really about you guys figuring out what you want to do to move forward. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. So I think the discussion is about the Berlin-Boylston Public Schools. And one of the questions is whether or not we want to have coordination across the schools, or do we want to have a collection of separate school districts, which is technically, legally what we have. In case you didn't recognize, this is the town of Berlin logo, Berlin Elementary School, the logo for the regional school district, Regional High School, and the town logo for Boylston Elementary School. So this could be, there may be 3 chapters, there may be more, there may be an epilogue, I don't really know. What tonight is about is this first one, which is an overview of the Berlin-Boylston Public School System, one, the organizational structure, and not a lot of detail, but hopefully enough detail where you'll get how it operates as a result of the structure. So I've got some examples in there of, because it is this way, here's what happens. Okay? I know that there are a lot of people that have a lot of questions about, so why is this happening, or is that really what happens? Please, as things come up on a slide that seem to be related to a question you either might have heard or have, speak up. I'd like for this to be kind of interactive, because there's no way I could put in the slides all of the things that people have been thinking about. So the best way we can get the most information out is people start asking questions. Okay? Before I do anything further, we have a new regional school committee member who's sitting right here, Lynn Ryan. So I want to welcome her to the regional school committee. Thanks for being here. Front row.
Yeah.
We also have other school committee members. I've seen Rebecca Healy in the back. Larry Brenner's around somewhere. Ruth Blandon's, there it is. Ruth Blandon's around, and is that it? I think that's it. Of course. Okay. So tonight we're going to do number 1 as best we can, and then I think future events, forums need to focus in sort of a detailed way, finances and accountability. Really, we should be spending time on student achievement. But I think it's going to be important to understand structure, how it operates, what happens. And then another layer of that is, so how does that work with the finances? I have some finance information in here, so you'll get a taste of that. You'll get some sense of that. You'll get some sense of the challenges because we have 3 separate districts, but not a lot of detail. We have a lot of information on how the finances work. That really should be another session if that's the way the school committee wants this to go. Right? So again, a little bit of finance, not a lot. That should be a session in and of itself. And again, we really spend a lot of time on student achievement. So given all of this stuff and given all the things that we've been talking about, how is any of that impacting how well your students are doing in school? That's really what we should be talking about. It's going to take some time to get to that place, but I do want to get to that place eventually. All right, organizational structure. So we actually have two different types of school districts. We have 3 schools, but 2 types of school districts. One of those is a regional school district. Obviously, Tohoto Middle High School, regional school district. We also have municipal school districts. These are districts that are connected to a specific town, municipality. Both of our elementary schools are municipal districts. The legal connections across these districts. I'll put this back here. If anybody needs one of these, let me know. The people in the back have these? So we have a regional agreement, which is a legal binding agreement between the towns of Berlin and Boylston to provide education for middle and high school students. The regional agreement includes 7th to 12th grade. Last year, the towns agreed to change the regional agreement to include the 6th grade. So once the new building opens up, the regional agreement will say the regional school committee is responsible for education 6 to 12. Right now it's still 7 to 12. We also have this thing called the superintendency union, and we happen to be superintendency union number 60. A superintendency union is an agreement between 2 municipal school committees that they can share a central office. Is essentially what that is. There's Mass General Law that describes what that is. There's not a lot of information about superintendency unions. But all that does is say, across the elementary schools, the 2 school committees have agreed that they can have one central office to be responsible for those schools. Thanks. Can people hear me without this?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. I got more. I'm going to get shot. Three schools, 2 different school districts. We actually have 4 school committees. We have each district, regional district, Tohoto, and the 2 elementary schools, each has a separate school committee. The union also has a school committee. So we actually have 4 school committees in this little teeny tiny district that we have. Berlin Memorial, Boylston Elementary, each have their own school committees. Tohoto has its own school committee, and Superintendency Union has its own school committee. There is no connection between the regional school committee and the superintendency union. Now that actually we just learned not too long ago. In Tohoto, the regional school committee has always had, actually not always, there was a time when there was a separate set of minutes for superintendency union number 60. But for a long, long time, the regional school committee meeting was really, and you'll notice on the agendas, it says regional school committee, superintendency union school committee. And so those 2 committees have been meeting simultaneously for a long, long time. Technically, each of those committees should have been making decisions on their own. For a long time, the regional school committee, made up of 6 people, have been making the decisions, and the assumption has been that, okay, we made a decision for region, that means that the union also made that decision. Technically, there should have been separate votes. The union should have said, okay, we're going to vote for the union. The region should have said, we're going to vote for the region. Haven't really been following that, but now that we realize that, we're going to have to follow it. For the most part, the superintendency union is responsible for hiring me, a few others in the central office, and managing shared staff that go across the different schools. And for the most part, we have the central office, which is responsible across all 3 schools. We do have other shared staff, but for the most part, those shared staff go across the elementary schools. So for example, we have an occupational therapist, speech therapist. We don't have enough need for full-time in either one school, so we have a person that goes back and forth to the elementary schools depending on the need. Each of the municipal school committees The elementary schools have 3 members. The region has 6 members. And they can be the members of the municipal, the elementaries, and for a long, long time, that's the way it's been. By default, the people in the elementary schools would then get appointed to the region. So those same 3 people would end up being 6. Yep.
Just a quick question for you, going back to the organizational structure. On the regional agreement, I know that once it's gone before on the town floor for a vote or approved. What about the superintendent's union? You know if that goes before town, on the town floor for a vote?
Good question.
Okay, I'm not trying to,
No, it's fine. That's a good question.
All right.
It does not. The superintendency union,
Repeat the question.
the question is, does the superintendency union decision, vote, agreement, have to go before the town at the town meeting, special town meeting or annual town meeting? The answer is no. The superintendency union is an agreement between the school committees. Does not have to go to the town floor. The regional agreement and all aspects of the regional agreement have to go to the town floor. Have to go to the community through the annual, could be a special town meeting, but it has to go through the town meeting. Okay? So recently, it has, ever since I've been here, which is not a long time, but for a long, long time, the people on the municipal committees have been the people on the regional committee. Just recently, we had a person resign from the regional committee, but stay on the municipal in Berlin. We now have another member on the regional committee. So rather than having 6 people in total, we now have 7 people in total. Confused yet? Still okay? Yes, I got a couple of headlines. You ain't seen nothing yet. The superintendency union school committee is made up of the 3 members who are on the municipal committees. So the 3 members who are on Berlin Memorial School Committee, the 3 members who are on the Boylston Elementary School Committee are, by law, they make up the Superintendency Union Committee. So Lynn, who is now a member of the Region Committee, can't be on the Superintendency Union Committee because she's not on one of the elementaries. So the person who resigned from the Region is not able to resign from the Union, so she's actually still a part of that. The central office is responsible for,
This is sort of a general sense of what's going on. Is this typical for other regionalized entities in Massachusetts that have similar municipal side, regional side? Or are we different in any way? Or is this just Massachusetts and the way it is?
all right, a lot of questions there. First, let me get the, are we different? No, I won't even touch that. There are, I believe that there are, don't quote me on the number, but there are something like 15, 16, 17 combination regional superintendency union districts in Massachusetts. Some of them are like the way we are. Northborough, Southborough is very much like the way we are. They have more students, they have more schools, they have 2 towns, very similar structure. Tohoto is also very similar to us. I believe they have 5 towns.
We are
Fantastic. What did I say? Fantastic. Has 5 towns. I talked to that superintendent, all he does is go to school committee meetings, and he's got other people doing that as well. Same structure, larger. I went to a Mars meeting once, I described our situation with 2 towns, 3 committees, I was feeling really bad. Fantastic superintendent talked about his situation, I felt much better. So there are other structures like ours, but there aren't a lot that are exactly like ours. The superintendency union, actually, since I came into this job, I've been talking with people from the state. There was a regionalization task force that I went and testified in front of, and I've been trying to get the Department of Education, the governor, anybody I can talk to really rethink superintendency unions and this structure. So I think it's really the most inefficient structure that we have for school systems. We have school systems out in the West that are much more complicated than this. And they have little K-6 districts that have a complete superintendent. Some of those students go to one regional school district, some of those go to another regional school district. Very, very complicated. So even with what we're talking about here, there are a lot of other structures that are a lot more complicated than we are. Does that help? Does that?
Oh, yeah.
I have a question, and maybe this is a little premature, but if the 6 members of the municipal school committee are the same people that vote on the superintendent's school committee, but the superintendent meetings are in conjunction with the regional committee, well then wouldn't that seventh person who's only on the elementary Berlin committee then also have to at least sit in on the Tohoto meetings to be able to vote on the superintendent's committee? Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
Did everybody get that? Okay. That's actually pretty good. Yes. So the question is, so because the regional school committee and the superintendency union school committee meet at the same time, and the superintendency union school committee is made up of the people on the elementary schools, then yes, in theory, all people should be at those meetings. But we haven't, hang on, but what we haven't been really clear on is in the agenda, in our agenda for the regional school committee, what, if any, of the topics are regional versus superintendency union. And so to some extent, by having those simultaneously, I think because of convenience and the same people, it makes sense to have that. Now, because it's going to be different, it may not make sense to have superintendency union committee and regional committee scheduled at the same time. So we have to probably really look at that. Somebody had a common question?
Isn't that why aren't they all meeting?
Sorry?
Why aren't they all meeting?
I don't know that I can answer that question. Okay, so I may have talked about this already. So the central office serves and supports each of the 4 school committees, carries out the tasks for each of the districts, and in many cases carries out the tasks in triplicate 2 times. Not really 4, because the superintendency union really doesn't require us to do things like payroll and accounts payable, and there's no teachers connected to it. So there's not a lot of heavy lifting for the superintendency union. For the most part, we are doing things 3 times, not 4 times. But there are 4 committees. The district school committees, regional school committee to municipal, have responsibility for their single school only. The union has responsibility for the central office and shared staff. Oh, this is the wrong file. Hang on, hang on. I noticed the typo, and I know I fixed the typo.
You're confusing us even worse. Doesn't help.
Oh. Okay. So the union is responsible for central office and shared staff only. I already talked about this simultaneous, so we don't have to do this again, right? The important part is that last part. I'll just say it again because it's important. The decisions need to be separate and distinct between the union committee and the region. We really haven't done that well. One committee cannot make decisions for another committee. Berlin Memorial School Committee can't make any decisions for the Boylston School Committee. Region can't make any decisions for either of the municipals, separate, distinct. No one school committee or legal public entity has decision-making responsibility for the entire Berlin-Boylston public school system. There was a meeting that we had not too long ago where all 6 members voted to focus on all students. And there was a couple of other votes, and because of one committee's vote, a municipal committee, the whole thing broke down. Even though that was a minority of the people, no one group has responsibility for the entire system. So even if you have all the people in the room at the same time talking about the same thing, There's no one entity that can make a decision for everybody. Each committee has to vote on its own.
And it has to be unanimous.
No, it has to be a majority. Doesn't have to be unanimous.
How is that not a majority?
If you have 3 people, so we've got 6 people.
Right? If 5 said yes and 1 said no.
So we got 6 people, right? Of those 6 people, 3 of those belong to the elementary school committee. 3 of those belong to the other elementary school committee. Collectively, they belong to a region.
Yeah.
So if one of the elementary school committees,
Of the whole committee.
2 of them vote no, which means that that committee doesn't pass, whatever everybody wanted to do can't happen. Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So it does.
That's a-
in a
that's
sense,
a really-
it does affect. Of course it affects.
So, people have asked, so what's all the fuss about? What is it you're asking for? And I keep saying, I want everybody to pay attention to all the students at the same time. This is it.
I have a
This is really hard to get to. Legally, we can't do that. I think collectively, the 6 people, now 7 people, can agree to do that and operate that way. We still have to go through the legal structure of having each of the committees vote. In no way, shape, or form have I ever said, take away the legal responsibility. What I've been asking for is for everybody to pay attention to all students in all schools. I don't care what town they come from. They can come from Worcester. There are schools that we're responsible for. So that's really important.
When you say that they don't make it, 1 or 2 people didn't make a decision or didn't vote for, is this affecting the regional, Tohoto, or is affecting the kids in Berlin?
The
How does-
topic,
yeah.
the topic was to have everybody pay attention to all students. So it was really a question to everybody, each of the committees. It was a question to all of them, and it was a question to each of the committees. And each of the committees needed to vote on their own. And so what we needed to have, and actually it wasn't even a 2-to-1, it was a 1-to-1, but one member wasn't there. And so it wasn't even a majority vote, but it couldn't pass because it wasn't a positive vote.
Wait, but if they weren't there, why did they get to vote?
They didn't get to vote, but because there were 2 people left, there were 2 members of the elementary school
It was
committee.
like a tie.
Yes. And you can't move forward on the time. So that's how it happened. And legally and structurally and technically, it happened the correct way. Yeah.
Is there a better legal and structural model within Massachusetts that we could potentially adopt, even though that would be a painful, long state-involved legal process?
I'm gonna ask the question to not be asked yet. Okay, defer.
Deferring that.
Is that the word? Okay, defer. Yeah,
It just looks like a structural defect that could be better handled through fixing.
it's a, yeah, and I want to talk about it. It's not yet, I want to kind of keep getting.
Can I ask another question?
Unless everybody's already got this, then we can kind of dispel the rest of the slides.
A little off topic, but as an appointed official, how many times can you not attend a meeting and have no rep? So
No
we can
vote.
elect someone and they can just never show up ever, and we don't have any reports?
Not until the next election.
Are you serious?
Yes. And now there are, I'm just going to go down this path a little bit, and I want to try to continue to go with the structure. I really want people to understand. And I know that that's been one of the key questions. What do we do about this? Is there anything that we can do about this? There are, in some towns there are things that you can do, in other towns there are not. In every town, at the very least, you can wait until the next election and have your voice show up then. So that's kind of the longest and I guess the worst. In other towns, there are other political things that you can do. I think what's important, and I said this at the last meeting, or one of the meetings, folks need to understand what the capabilities are in your town. Go to your board of selectmen, go to the people who have the bylaws, and kind of take a look at what's available to you. So I need to work, and I probably haven't done this well enough, I need to work really hard to stay out of that political kind of realm. This really needs to be up to, if people want to change this, people in the communities need to really say, okay, so if we do, and I say that we agree that we want to change it, how do we go about doing that? I mean, the political structure is there for you guys. It really is. And there are ways to do it sometimes. It's frustrating and you can't get through it all, but that's what you have to do. So, okay. some of this feels like people are beginning to get it, but I'll do a little bit more, and maybe some things I'll skip over. But we'll keep going, just so you get a real good sense and a concrete sense of the state. So, municipal districts operate as separate districts. The staff of the municipal districts, right, so all the employees in Berlin Memorial, all the employees in Boylston Elementary, are actually employees of the towns, the respective towns. All the teachers in Boylston Elementary are employees of the town of Boylston, right, and vice versa for. The employees in the region are employees of the region. The region is a legal entity, okay, and a fiscal agent. There are, in the elementary schools, there are town-side costs that we have to be aware of, but they come out of the local budget, the town budgets. For example, health insurance, property casualty insurance because of the buildings. There's a whole variety of things that are considered to be education costs, but they sit on the line items in the town budgets. All of those things exist for the region, but the region has to cover the expenses. Right? So we manage the expenses. We send assessments to the towns would give us the money to pay for it, but we still have all those in our budget. Typical in schools, typically the amount of money you use for salaries is somewhere in the 60, 70, 75% range for municipal schools. And that's because a lot of those costs are sitting on the town side. In the region, salaries for employees are more like 50% because all of those expenses are sitting in our budget. We have to pay attention to all of them. So that's one of the differences. I already said a lot of this already. Anything in here I need to say? Regional view of equal binding document. I said it all. Jumped ahead. Question?
You said that there's an occupational therapist, a speech language pathologist. I know the music teacher. They're shared between the two schools. So how do they figure into this? Because they're half in Boylston Municipal and half in Berlin.
It's actually, I don't know that we have anybody that's half. What we'll have is 60% in Boylston, 40% in Berlin. Sometimes it's 75% in Berlin, 25% in Boylston. And when that happens, we pay for that 25% out of the Boylston finances. We'll pay for the 75% of Berlin out of the Berlin finances.
You receive separate W-2s, correct?
Yes, separate W-2s, separate checks. The central office, the elementary schools pay for 25% of us. The region pays for 50% of us, which was an agreement that was made a long time ago. I get 3 separate checks, physical separate checks. There are 3 payrolls that get processed. Whenever they have to figure out how to pay for me, they split up the piece that they owe me for that paycheck, and they put a piece on the one elementary, a piece on the other elementary, and a piece on the region. Whenever people like...
I was just going to say, so you have a speech pathologist, and the reason you might not want to do 20/20, because you probably wouldn't be able to hire one, because they wouldn't get any benefits.
Right.
So you have to go one direction or another, so you can employ somebody, otherwise no one would take the position.
Right. The other part about the benefits is going to come up in a little bit, is if we hire somebody, elementary is particularly, this is the case in the elementary especially. One year we have a need for a 60% person in Boylston Elementary. The rule is that whatever the most amount of time you spend in one of the elementaries, that's where your benefits come from. So 60% of Boylston Elementary, your benefits come from the town of Boylston. If for some reason that demand changes for that particular role, and the following year 60% needs to happen in Berlin and 40 in Boylston, then that person, without any choice, has benefits changed. And now the benefits are coming out of Berlin. There are different benefit packages. Boylston is 70% town, 30% employee. Berlin is 75% town, 25% employee. Berlin doesn't have any retiree health insurance. Boylston has retiree health insurance after you're in the system for 10 years. So if you've been kind of bounced around, you may not be in the system for 10 years even though you've been around for 12. That's why I use the word broken. Questions? This is kind of these are the most important items that fall into that kind of, okay, so how do we do this with 3 separate districts? Every district has to deal with each one of these separately. Each of the 3 districts has a separate teacher contract. So when I negotiate teacher contracts, I negotiate 3 times. The employees, we talk about central office are shared. Each district has its own employees. Each district has its own school calendar. Now, the district has been working for a long time to try to align those. Unfortunately, if there's a decision made at the teacher contract level about number of days for teachers, number of days for students, half days, whatever those are, they impact the calendar. And when we try to put together the calendar, there's only so much we can do because some of those decisions are made at the contract level. So the benefits we talked about, we have to do a separate Department of Education reporting and accountability. So every year, every single school district has to report to the Department of Ed through a thing called the end of year report. Every single dime that was spent, where it was spent, how it was accounted for, the line items it was accounted for, and we have to do that for each district. Now, I have to say that so if you were just in a municipal district and you had multiple schools in that one district, the business office would still have to create accountability reports for each of the schools. But it's all in one file, it's all in one place, and you can connect them, and then you send that whole thing off to the Department of Ed. We actually send 3 separate Department of Ed end of the year reports to the Department of Ed. So John Roy, bless his heart, after he finishes going through the end of the year, he has to make sure he gets Berlin done, then he has to make sure he gets Boylston done, and then finally he has to come back and try to do Tohoto, instead of doing it all in one process. Budget and account management, payrolls and billing, we talked a little bit about the payroll, 3 separate payrolls. The towns process the payroll for the municipal, for the elementary schools. We process the payroll for the region. We use consultants so they actually generate the checks. But it's a separate payroll process because we have to connect with all these 3 different entities. I probably jumped ahead of myself. So the challenge that I've kind of described, central office manages each of these components for each of the 3 school districts. And this is the triplicate nature. One of the notions about superintendency unions that existed when this entity was created and still exists for a lot of people. People describe the superintendency union as an efficient way to provide a central office, the same central office, for multiple districts. So rather than having a central office for each of these separate districts, let's have one that can cover all 3. Makes sense, looks good on paper. What people don't realize is that the central office has 3 separate jobs. We just happen to be the same people. So it's not an efficient process. Certainly in the out west, when you've got really little teeny tiny districts and the central office can manage all those, a lot of that makes sense. Some of the districts out west is even worse shape than we are in terms of having multiple jobs. So it's really not an efficient model. So these are some of the things that were on the list previously that we have to take care of. And unfortunately, we've got to take care of them in each place. And the twain shall never speak. That's a brick wall picture. 3 of them. So what about the students? We work, the central office, I got to hand it to the central office. The central office works really hard to not worry about the brick walls. The central office works really hard to focus on all students. Doesn't matter what school they're at. In fact, it's better for us if we can implement programs that cut across all 3 schools. When we know what's happening in each of the elementary schools and there's some consistency, doesn't mean they're the same. My friend Mr. Ellis last week at the Berlin Committee wanted to make sure that we didn't regionalize because he wanted to make sure that Berlin stayed independent and Berlin Memorial. Nobody, I want to make this really clear, I'll say it as many times as I have to, nobody has ever said, or do we want these schools to be the same. That's not what this is about. Berlin Memorial has its own culture. Boylston Elementary has its own culture. Tohoto has its own culture. There's a couple of classrooms in Tohoto that has their own culture. We want to maintain all of that. It's really important that each school has their own individual, independent personality. But if we were able to look across all schools, understand those personalities, we would have a much better chance of implementing programs that are focused on student achievement. The brick walls get in our way. So we have to go these workarounds to figure out how to work around the brick walls in order for us to bring some consistency to the educational program in the schools. Boylston Elementary, Berlin Memorial, feed into Tohoto. All A lot of the students that go to those elementary schools end up here. We also have, at any given year, 70 to 90 students from outside of our these communities that come in, school choice. So we're paying attention to about anywhere from, about 1,000 students. I think this past year was like 1,050, the change. One of the really interesting things to me when I first came in was to find out how many students, Berlin and Boylston residents, are going to other places. Over 250 students that live in Berlin and Boylston or attended schools in other places. It includes Assabet vote, includes charter schools, includes school choice schools, includes private schools, includes homeschool.
Is that
Now,
secondary school, high school?
That's across all schools.
Okay.
6 through 12, over 200. So most of it happens 6 through 12. Over 200 are going to other places. Now, I will say this, and I've tried to say this every time I've brought this point up. For a lot of these students, the program that they are now in, that is not here, is exactly the program they should have. Whether it's a voc school, whether it's a different kind of educational philosophy in a charter school, whatever it is. There are, many of these students really should be in those schools, but not 250. There are a lot of students, there are a lot of families that have decided that, for whatever reason, these schools are not able to provide the education that they need. There should be a lot of these students should be here. Now, a lot of people have said because of the facilities, absolutely legitimate. There are a whole lot of other reasons. And I have to say, unfortunately, we haven't done a good job to really understand why. For every single one of those 250 students, we should know the answer. Every single one of those 250 students, why are they going to school somewhere else? And we should get some legitimate answers. Because I want to go to this private school. My family's been going there for generations. Absolutely, we'll help them get it.
How much does it cost us for every student that leaves?
Depends. Depends on the schools. Assabet Vocational School has a tuition. Charter schools, there's a way, the state has figured out how to pull the money that each school is supposed to spend and move that money to charter schools.
But we lose money
We lose money.
every time a student leaves.
School choice, just like we get, every time we have a school choice student comes from a different community, we get $5,000. It's been that way from the beginning. Whenever we have a resident student that goes to a school choice, $5,000 does not come to us, it goes to that school. So that's kind of how it works. The state is providing us with money. Instead of giving us that money, they take, okay, you're going to assess that, and that money's going over to that school. Homeschool is a whole different thing that doesn't cost us. But unfortunately, if they were here, we would get money to educate them. I was actually surprised. Again, homeschool is absolutely appropriate for a lot of people. I was surprised at the number of homeschool students we have. It feels really high for the size district we have. Private school is another thing. I know that there are parents whose children are in private schools that would rather not do that. That's a big expense. We don't lose money, but we don't get the money for them that we would educate. And then a lot of students that we probably could have here. Again, I don't know enough of the reasons why to be able to kind of talk to that, and I feel bad about that. We should know.
What's the number that goes to Assabet?
Right now, both towns we're at about 50, I think. Less. Well, that's right, because we dropped.
50.
So we're down to, no, total Berlin and Boylston. When I first got here, it was 50. It was 30 Boylston and about 20 in Berlin now. Do you know?
It's about 46.
Yeah. So it's gotten, the last couple of years, it has been less. The year before, 2 years before I got here, the year before I got here, and the year coming into when I got here, there were large numbers. Part of that is the class, part of that is a whole variety of things. But some of those numbers have started to come down. So I guess we're like mid-40s. Yeah.
How about, you said the homeschool percentage is high. What does that mean? What number?
I think now we're at like 22, 23.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
not a lot, but relatively speaking, it feels like a lot to me. In my other districts, many more students, we didn't even get close to that.
I have a question.
Yeah, question.
How much does it cost us to educate a child?
Depends who you ask. The Department of Ed has a thing called per pupil expenditure. And it's actually different in each of the schools. Because we're a separate district, because we're separate districts, the Department of Ed figures it out differently for each of the districts. I don't know if I should quote you the numbers. I want to say Boylston is something like 11 or 12. Berlin Memorial is 14. Tohoto is, actually I think Boylston is 10 or 11. Berlin is 14, and Tohoto is something like 12 or 13.
Can we get 5?
For school choice.
School choice.
For school choice. For,
But then it still costs us 11,600 more?
yes. And it's actually one of the issues, I'll go down this path just a little bit. When I first got here, we had mid-90s school choice in Tohoto. The school choice program is actually very beneficial. We have students come in from other communities. We have classes that have enough enrollment so that we can run the classes. So it's great to have a school choice program. But exactly to your point, to the extent that we have to hire staff to take care of the school choice students, it's a net negative financial model for us. We have to use money that we get from the towns and our own coffers from the state to kind of add in the rest for the school choice. The ideal model is we've got all the staff and all the facilities and all the equipment for the students that are here residential. And we've got rooming classes for other students. We bring in school choice and get $5,000 on top of what it's going to cost us to provide education. We're a long way away from that. I think, as best as I can tell, I think the numbers at Tohoto should really be about 60, 65, and then the money would be icing. Instead of, we rely on that for our operational expenditures. State never assumed that school choice would be used for that. But given the times, most school districts are relying on that as part of their operational revenue. So that's a problem that we need to kind of work on. In fact, one of the reasons we're now down to 70, I think 72 this year, is that coming, not the first year I was here, but the second year, we actually put a limit on the school choice coming into Tohoto. And unfortunately, that's just when the economy hit the tank. And so we reduced students, which was good, but we reduced financing, which is not so good. So we're kind of paying for that. So it was bad timing, but we absolutely need to kind of work on that. The ideal, and we've talked about this, is we're assuming with the new Tohoto building that we'll have some of these 250 students that are going to stay here. Most of the students that move out, they go out between the elementary and Tohoto. Sometimes in 6th grade, because our charter schools start in 6th grade. Sometimes in 9th grade, because they go both schools. So there's a whole variety of reasons why that happens. So the goal is to keep those students here. Reduce school choice, raise resident students to stay here, and then the school choice model works for us. So that was kind of the long-range plan. We're kind of in the middle of that. Okay, other questions? I don't know how much more of this. We may have actually done a lot of this. Yeah, we pretty much talked through all. This is kind of the process that we have to use. We rely on municipal town treasurers and accountants. The Legion does that, has our own treasurer and so on. Purchasing, people have heard me tell the story about if we buy a paperclip for the central office, we actually have to have 3 separate warrants. We have to charge each of the 3 districts. We create a separate purchase order for whatever supplies we have in the central office. I've seen warrants with like $1.67 because it's been split up 3 different ways. And we do it 25% elementary, 25% elementary, and 50% for the region. This one, we talked a little bit about, not tonight, but just to make sure people are aware. This is one of the, I think it's one of the things that has come out that has been one of the major frustrations. It's clearly a frustration, but it's not one of the major ones. When we go to meetings, and we have 3 separate meetings, we have to make sure that everybody gets that information. We repeat the information 3 times. We produce the information 3 times. And then a lot of times, if we had the same meeting with all the people, we could do it once, and then actually spend other meetings on other things. So it's definitely a frustration. This ought to be an easy way to fix some of the inefficiencies. A lot of people heard about this whole TriMeeting kind of tobacco thing. That's what that was intended to do. Have everybody in the same room at the same time. All committees would have the responsibility for taking votes on the committee. We just wanted to have everybody there so we could talk about all the topics. And everybody could kind of think about it at the same time. That was the intent behind that. A lot of times, 60% of the information that we produce is reproduced. We redo it and we present it again. I find myself in the middle of a meeting, so did I say this already, or what did I say it to? Did I say it the same way? I don't know.
I don't understand, why don't the meetings look like that?
Sorry?
I don't understand why don't you have to look like that?
Because you're not allowed to.
By who?
School committee. School committee overall decided to not have tri-meetings, decided to not have a collective meeting, and decided also essentially to not have all 6 people focus on all students.
So the 6 people all voted no, they don't want to do that.
Not all 6, enough for us to not move forward. Remember when we did that before at the elementary school?
Yeah?
That was the vote that we were talking about. And then at one of the other, well, you know what? Let me move off of that because I don't, school committees are responsible for one school. I already talked about this. Policy development. This is one of the things that's probably a little confusing and not clear whenever we adopt a policy. And typically we try to do it at that region superintendent's union committee meeting. And then also typically the assumption has been that once it gets in the policy book, everybody votes for it. Technically, and for the most part, the district has done this fairly well. Each of the separate committees need to vote on the policy. It is possible that you could have a policy that was agreed to in one of the committees that would go to a different committee and they would decide to do a different policy and then we would have multiple policies in the book. There's actually not a lot of that. 96% of the policies in the school committee policy book applies to all 3 schools. So for the most part, the district has done that well. There are a couple in there that are kind of building specific. But individual committees maintain authority at the town local level and priorities are focused at the town school level. For me, this is the case because of this organizational structure. Not because of anything any one person did or people do. It's because of the organizational structure. The organizational structure is such that the committees have the responsibility for a school. They do not have the responsibility for the system. And so by default, they pay attention to the school. This one is kind of interesting. One of the things that we try to do, because of the often unforeseen special ed costs, we'll have a student that has gotten into school, they're here, and for whatever reason the student needs to go to another school to be able to take care of their services. It's not a cost that we budgeted, we didn't know about, and so we've got a cost in the middle of the budget season. So we'll have to kind of generate some funds out of our budget to pay for that. What we've tried to do is actually build a contingency fund so that we were prepared for that. And a lot of times the tuitions can go anywhere from $5,000 to $6,000 all the way up to a couple $100,000. There are some tuitions that are more than that. There's a tuition that I know about that's $300,000. The budgets for the elementary schools are just about $3 million. So Berlin Memorial is about 2.9, Boylston is about 3.1, 3.2. So one of those tuitions, and we actually have a potential one that's about $275,000. It's almost 10% of the budget. So what we try to do is build contingencies, but because of that brick wall, we had to build contingencies in each of the separate districts. We could work across those districts, fiscally across those districts, we could build one contingency that we could use for those unforeseen emergencies. Right now we have to kind of build them separately, because we can't share the money across the system. So we've got money sitting in contingency funds that we need and we use. We could probably do it with less if we could kind of share it. We have 3 sets. This is a student information management system, and this is the MCAS test. All 3 managed, organized, analyzed separately. We work around the brick wall in order to bring the MCAS together so we can kind of learn about and think about how our students are doing. We've got some teachers that do a phenomenal job of doing that, but they do have to work around that brick wall to get that done. This is for our employees. Employee personnel information management system, I think. The Department of Ed is requiring us to do that. We have to do that separately. We can't pull it all together. We have to send them 3 separate files. And there are separate databases for each of those. Separate database for each of the students in each of the districts, the employees in each of the districts. Get it? Have enough? I don't know if there's anything more that really wouldn't just give you kind of the same picture. You have it in your slides. I can keep going if you want. See if there's anything else.
I just have a question about the tri-meetings, which sounds so simple. But that has to do with for legal reasons, or there is nowhere in paper that says you can have legally tri-meetings. That is up to the school committee meetings to make the decision, or like I said, or it's illegal, or it's something that you just want because it's more convenient.
There is, we actually checked with the Attorney General, and there's nothing illegal about a TriMeeting. What has to happen is you have to, so if you have a meeting with all three committees, you have to make sure that each of those committees have a posted meeting at the appropriate time, that each of the committees open their meeting for their school committee, that somebody takes minutes for that explicit committee. You can actually have, and the person in the AG's office said this, you could have a person take minutes for all the meeting, have the same set of minutes be adopted by each of the committees. You don't have to create separate minutes, you can have the same set of minutes. So legally it's fine. The challenge is, I should probably let one of the school committee members describe the challenge. The challenge, I already any of the school committee members want to describe the challenge?
I think we should. I want to hear that.
I mean, I think our problem is, I don't understand why it's such a big deal. And I was at the meeting last week, and people were saying, I don't want Berlin to change. And my feeling is, well, what would they be, what's their position? What are they giving up by doing this? And what's the downside of it?
So, it's a good question. Maybe it's a good question. And there are probably a whole slew of other questions that need to be directed to the school committee members.
Right.
So, this is not a school committee meeting. Not posted, right? No decisions, no deliberation. So, I'm going to take back the, do we have a school committee? Let's not do that. What I just handed out was what I presented to the school committee on November 8th. And that came after a region superintendent union committee, a couple of them, when I did the worst job ever thing. And people were asking me, well, how could it be better? What is it that you could do? Does it have to be regionalization? And I've said all along, no, it doesn't have to be regionalization. I'll say it again. From my perspective, are you kidding me? Regionalize. This is ridiculous. If you can't do that, or you don't want to do that, there are other ways to be efficient. At the very least, if you did these things, this place would be a whole lot easier to kind of work with. The one item on this list that kind of broke the whole thing down was the TriMeetings. And there's an apparent challenge for folks to be able to make a decision from multiple school committees when they're at that same table. So and you're going to need to ask the school committee members to be a little bit more detailed about that, because that's what I get from that, but they need to answer that question. These things couldn't happen. At a minimum, these should be easy. People saw these as, well, how come you're not doing them already? But we're not. And so this structure, the brick wall, the whole thing continues. So, yeah, I don't think we need to do anymore. You get the picture. Questions?
So even though you took all those votes and it didn't pass in one of the committees, are there any rules about when you can vote on it again? Like you have to wait a certain amount of time?
It's up to the committees.
Repeat the question.
So is there a time frame? So you took the vote, didn't pass. Is there an amount of time that you have to wait? Is there something else you have to do before the committee takes that topic up again and discusses it and changes it? It's up to the committee. It's really,
Well, the short answer is no. They just post it the next school committee, take it up as an agenda item and vote on it again. That's all.
if they so desire.
If they so desire.
Exactly. And I've said this a couple of times. You know, as the superintendent of schools, how do I say this? There's really only so far down this path I should be going. I think I've kind of crossed the boundary a number of times. I'm really not supposed to try to convince the school committee what to do and how to operate. They should be owning that. The thing that I've been asking of the school committee is, you guys own the vision and the direction of the school system. I've been coming up with the goals, I've been coming up with the vision, which I continue to do and I know how to do. I've done an okay job with that, but it doesn't come from the people who are responsible for doing it. And that's been kind of people say, well, we'll put together a plan. We'll put together a plan based on the vision and the direction that the school committee owns, and there's not one. Because we don't have a single collection of people focused on all the schools. So, even if we muck around with the administrative stuff, the TriMeeting, it'll certainly make things easier. The brick wall will stay. The redundant financial accounting systems will stay. So,
I know you can't really advocate for a position on this, but can someone explain to me just what the specific objection to regionalizing all the schools is? I don't understand that.
yeah,
I mean, if somebody else wants to offer, is there anybody who understands that position?
I think it's a good question, but I guess certainly if one of the school committee members wants to kind of chime up. But I guess what I would suggest is, and we've talked a little bit about this. We have a lot of people who say, I know a lot of people who would like to regionalize. I know a lot of people who are absolutely adamant not to regionalize. I don't know what a lot is. We have a room full of people, but this is still not all of the voters. So one of the things that I think needs to happen is actually in the context of this, because we've talked about, let's do a survey. Let's ask everybody in town, what do they think about regionalization? And I've been, time out. What are the answers you're going to get when people don't really understand this? Right? So I think the first step is to make sure that this education gets out, and then when people answer that question, they'll be answering from an informed position. So now, you've got some education, and if somebody wants, the school committee wants, but I still think, even if you get everybody in this room to say yes to regionalization, or everybody in this room to say no, I think you still need to really understand what the overall community, first, overall community needs to understand this, and then be able to say yes or no.
I actually was hoping to maybe ask Rebecca or Jeff directly. I understand what Mr. McDermott is saying, that the community may not be well informed, and this has been great. I felt like I understood most of it, this cleared up a lot. But the school committee members are well informed. You understand all of this. How have the other school committee members that haven't been attending the meetings and have been kind of against things, what are the reasons they're presenting to you at your meetings for not doing this?
We haven't discussed this at a meeting, so I'm not going to speak for anybody else. So we can't discuss it and not know the meeting. So that said, and further, we couldn't even agree to have a meeting to discuss goals for the entire district because we couldn't agree that we could actually set goals for an entire district. So we couldn't even get to that broader topic in general. Now, speaking for myself, I'm probably of the board, the collective boards, the furthest along the path to thinking we should fully regionalize pre-K through 12. That conclusion came to me shortly after I came on board the school committee, and I saw largely the administrative overhead and the fact that we really needed to coordinate things like curriculum from the elementary school all the way through the high school. So that's something that I came to. The reason why, I haven't even been out there until I began to get some of this feedback, particularly hearing at some of the meetings like people about what was not already regionalized, and actually getting some of this positive feedback from the counties. I just think historically the towns have and I'm talking not school committee people, but just the old timers in town are like, oh no, I'm not giving up any of my control. And that's really where it comes down to, is you think you have control. But my perspective about the issue about the regionalization is we already have 7 through 12 and soon to have 6 through 12 regions. We have to live with that. It's really going to take an act of God to break up what's called the Berlin-Wilson Regional School District. We all know it's a concept. The legal name is you really can't undo the high school region that we have. I mean, you can't. The state isn't going to allow it. It may take us a decade and we'll get nowhere. So you've got this entity that's the regional high school. And we have to live with it no matter what, like it or not. So anybody who's got an objection to living in a region, well, sorry, this is what we've got. And so now we've got ourselves a situation where we've got 2 elementary districts that basically are, I hate to say it, play second fiddle to the region. So all of the strains and structures of our crazy administrative structure, you're not going to solve unless you absorb it into one district. And the only complaints I hear are things like Mr. Ellis, who comes to every meeting, bless us all. He's worried about the character of the elementary school. But I have friends who live in I've had friends in the Wachusett district, I have a couple of teacher friends there now. And you talk to them, and every single one of those schools in those elementary districts has a very different character and personality. And you talk to the parents there, and they have a lot of pride about which elementary school they go to and it's a lot of different character between those schools. And that's a huge region, and that's a full pre-K through 12 region. So you're not losing your school character or your school whatever. So, yeah, you might lose something, but we've already sort of lost that something 40 years ago when we made the decision to regionalize the
You know, it's not defined, character's not defined by the contracts.
Yeah.
You know, that's, I don't understand that objection. It just seems to be, you know, we through educating the towns, we've successfully expanded the region by 1 grade. If we successfully educate the towns, we should be able to expand it by the other 5. Plus.
If a majority of the townspeople want that to happen. So that's that question about, so how many people really want this to happen or don't want it to happen? And I want to caution people because what I provided was the picture of the structure. A lot of people think that if we completely regionalize, there's a financial impact. Right? One of the comments is that Boylston can't afford to pay for the education. I firmly believe that that's not the case, and I've shown that a lot of times. But unless we kind of provide that information and make sure that people have that part of the story as well, I would suggest that you don't get to the, okay, let's regionalize it, let's not. We still got a lot of education to do. There's still a lot of pieces to this. There's student achievement, probably the most important thing of all. Even if it does cost more, so what? It's better for the students, if indeed that's the case. I believe that is. But what has to happen is, once more, education for all of you on what's the impact of all of this on our students. So we're kind of, you know, we've taken one step. There's one leg of the stool that we've kind of go through. We've got to have the other 2 before you're really completely informed about kind of the state of things. So the conversation should continue to happen, but I guess what I would hope is that we get to those next 2 pieces in the not too distant future, so you have the whole picture. Is that fair?
I'm Heidi McDonald. I live in Boylston. I've got 2 children, one who graduated last year and one who will graduate next year. Brian has to be politically correct and kind of tiptoe around certain topics, but I can put my foot in my mouth. So.
Can you take the microphone?
No. I'll use my mother voice. How's that?
Piece of cake.
Okay. If you read Brian's memo that was given to the school committee,
We didn't get copies back here.
everything on here, with the exception of the so-called TriMeetings, was approved, if I remember correctly. If I remember correctly, the region, the elementary school committee, both voted for everything on here. The Berlin Memorial School Committee split 1-1 on everything on here, but then if I remember correctly, they took a second vote subtracting those TriMeetings, and then they voted successfully. So everything else on here was voted successfully by all of the members of all of the committees. So if you read over that, part of it says they're going to operate as a board of directors. Part of it says they're going to work with the community and the school system to develop a mission, a principle, and a purpose. Establish subcommittees to work outside of the school committees. None of that's done. So I think before you talk about regionalization, you really need to understand your school committees. And I was in kind of a boring meeting today at work, so I jotted down some things, and this is just my opinion, okay? I think, in my opinion, in the past, the school committee took on a particular role, and our superintendents kind of went along with that role. So what we have now is a superintendent who truly understands what the role of a superintendent is and what the role of a school committee is. And I think therein lies the problem. Taken from what the school committees as a unit agreed upon, and that was to act as a board of directors, I'm going to compare it to what business does, and that is they have a board of directors and they have a CEO. There's a tendency to, ooh, too much coffee, I'm really not nervous. There's a tendency to let the board of directors decide rather than advise or approve. For example, asking the board of directors what you want me to do, which is basically asking permission on what is needed to be done in the first place. When in actuality, it should be the CEO coming to the board, telling the board members what he's planning to do, then taking advice from the board of directors on whether it's right strategically or not, consider their advice, and execute on what the CEO feels in his best judgment is the right path to take for the business. That's what the CEO does. That's what he's hired to do. He's hired to make decisions, he's hired to execute those decisions, and he's hired to integrate those decisions. Obviously, if the board of directors disagrees in a strategy, then they can have a serious discussion about it. But in the long run, it's the CEO that needs to come and champion what he believes, take ownership, and take the proper steps, and basically step into the role. I think our CEO knew his role, and he did his best to try to explain the school committee's role. But in the end, I don't think any of the school committee members understood their role as a collaborative school committee, and because of that, we lost a phenomenal superintendent. When the school committee regroups, what I ask is that you need to look internally at yourself, both as individual members and collectively as a group, because organizational ineffectiveness flows down through every single level of this school, all the way from the top right down to the kids. And when your superintendent and all of your administration are spending repetitive hours going to multiple meetings explaining the exact same thing, when they could be spending that time on strategically figuring out scheduling or whatever else helps our students, then you're taking time away from our kids and you're spending money inefficiently. So I guess I ask you to please remember, you as a school committee, that when you hire a superintendent, when you hired the superintendent, you hired him because you believed in him. And most important, you hired him because he knows more about education than any of you do. That's his job. So that when he comes and then be disappointed when he does the exact job he was hired to do. So one more thing. Basically, you need to be at the school committee meetings because they are going to be restructuring themselves.
So do the members of the committee.
The second thing is, when someone asked Brian if they have any type of recourse, Boylston does. Boylston has a recall. I want to say we voted it 9 or 10 years ago or something like that. Berlin does not. So it doesn't mean you can't, at your next town meeting, get something on the warrant to get that put onto the warrant and vote on it. But right now in Berlin, you have no recourse.
Thank you. I'm not going to say anything. I just open up the mic.
Questions? Comments? Yes?
Maybe you'll choose not to answer this, and I don't blame you if you don't, but I think you must feel the support of many of us in the community, and I'm wondering if we as townspeople try to work on these changes and have our school committees be more cooperative. Is there any chance of you reconsidering staying?
Put you in a spot. Put you in a spot again.
I do have the option to not answer that.
Right.
It's a hard question. I don't want to leave. I can't do this. So, and you know, I was hoping all the way through 12 p.m. December 31st, that there was a way that we could figure out how to make it so that I could do this job. Didn't happen then, hasn't happened since. In fact, from my perspective, it's gotten worse. And I want to make something really clear. The Berlin School Committee is the one where all the visibility is. That's not the only problem. This is pervasive. This is, I am absolutely convinced, the organizational structure. It encourages what's been happening. It encourages school committees that should be thinking about strategic, overall system student needs, and they're locked into individual schools. No school committee member should be at a school talking to the principal or teachers about doing what to do. I've got a majority of my school committee members doing that across the entire system. So Berlin is not, all of the things that have been going on in Berlin is where all of the visibility has been. It's where all the heat is. That's a symptom of the fundamental problem in this system. And so, at a minimum, I mean, even if this happened, the list of things that I put forward, even if that happened, I wasn't so sure that I could do the job, but I was willing to at least try. That was back in November. Not only has no steps been taken to get to that place, we've taken a whole lot of steps back. I can't do this job. So right now, if everything stayed the way it is, I would not be able to. Something would have to change really drastically, really soon. I will say though, I don't have a job. Good plan. But that's where I am. Yeah.
So maybe you don't have to answer this question either, or you don't want to. But what do you suggest? What is the basic way to start making this change? Where we should go? Why we should do a meeting? Who would you? Which should we contact?
Still not ready for that. I firmly believe we're still not ready for that. We've still got two pieces to get to. The finances is really important. There are a lot of folks that are hanging on to one town can't afford the education that the other town wants to be able to provide. And I strongly believe that that's not the case. Since I've been here, we have worked really well with both towns to bring in level budgets. We have not impacted students. We have not impacted staff. We can do this. But we can't have people saying that town can't afford this, town can't do that. And it's one of the reasons, from my perspective, that regionalization makes sense, because it takes that political question right out of the mix and puts the decisions about the schools in your guys' hands, not in the towns. But before that happens, there needs to be education about the finances and about student achievement. So those things have to happen, I think, before you get to that place. People can, like Heidi said, people can start understanding what's available in each town for being able to work in the political structure, whatever that needs to be. But you know, that's not the best that I can do is provide you with the information that you need, and I still think there are pieces that you don't have. So I think we need to continue to do that.
Now, do we work the same way Southborough and Northborough work? Because they seem to have, I mean, I never heard problems about their town. I haven't. Maybe you have, but I haven't. But do we have the same system?
Yeah. You know, these are human organizations, right? So there are always going to be issues regardless of how clean things are. What happens in Northborough or Southborough, you can look at that, you can learn from it. This is Berlin-Boylston Regional School System. This is Berlin-Boylston Public Schools. We're our own entity, just like each of the elementaries have their own personality. Berlin-Boylston Public Schools has its own personality. So we can certainly learn from that, but we really need to look within, really understand what's happening here.
What's the date of the next meeting?
Don't know yet. I got to make sure. I got to get the school committee to. You have a date?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to encourage everyone to come to our school committee meetings. The next regional Union 60 meeting is on the 8th of next month. It'll be in the Tohoto Library at 7 p.m. When they're usually on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. We have that on a Tuesday because it's a schedule conflicts. So it's the 8th at 7 p.m. And every agenda has an opportunity, in fact, two of them, for the public to comment either on items on the agenda or items not on the agenda. And an awful lot of the questions that were strategically not answered here, because this is not an appropriate place. You can ask with those questions if the school committee meeting is in session, and you can ask whatever you want. I really would not like that thinking I don't have answers to the questions that I came with, but there's certain things we simply can't answer here. But please come, it's open. And if anyone wants to be on a binder list, I have an email I send out to create my people when the next meetings are coming up. If anyone wants to be on that, you can let me know.
It's also in the tidbits.
And it's also
Good job.
Toronto tidbits. It's been fantastic.
I will, so one of the requests was to have these meetings, really kind of ironic, to have these meetings, one for the region, one for Berlin, one for Boston. So given my status, I can say, no, we're not doing that. So what I will do, I'll work with the committee members and try to figure out another date to cover the second two pieces. We'll do that really shortly. I don't know when that's going to happen, but we'll try to get information out about when that'll happen, hopefully before the next region meeting, and maybe if we have any time at the Berlin meeting, we can start announcing it and try to get the information out. So I do really, I strongly suggest you kind of wait for the other two pieces. Make sure you understand the finance piece and the student piece. That's going to be really important to kind of put the whole picture together. And we'll try to do that really soon.
And will you use the phone system to do that, to announce that like you did last time?
I will, yes. Yes.
That was appreciated.
Good. How many people did not get that? It was a Thursday night. Everybody got that message about the meeting?
Yes.
You said I know. I tried to cover that at first. It's not about snow.
Right, we can post this on the web, so that way people couldn't make it, couldn't access this, because this is a lot of
Good idea.
information.
Yep. Sure, can do. Yep.
I just have a question. Not meeting, TriMeeting or whatever, but or regionalization, curriculum coordination as far as Berlin and Boylston getting up to Tohoto, how does that, if it regionalizes, does it change? I mean, do they get to pick their own books? How does that all, or is it happening now? So when they get to Tohoto, they're all on the same page. I mean, isn't that the ultimate goal, is the education, and is that happening without talking about regionalization or not regionalization?
We're working really hard to make that happen. We actually had this past year, actually it's now over a year, of a team from both elementary schools working together to identify math learning standards, and together and collectively they identified a program that both schools had. Phenomenal. We're not regionalized. That all worked. One of the challenges was how to pay for it, because we couldn't share the money. We had to figure out how much to pay for the program coming out of this, who was going to pay for professional development. So there was kind of those workarounds and kind of working through the brick walls, which we were able to do. So we are trying to do that. That's why, when I talk about the central office and how hard we try to really focus on all students, we do as much as we can. It also doesn't mean that both schools have to have the same program. They absolutely have to be working toward the same standards, so the same set of skills. You can get to those places in two different ways. It's a whole lot easier if it is the same program. We can have professional development together, and all that really makes it much more efficient. We do try to do that, but we have to kind of deal with the brick walls in order to get that done. But the math team, the folks that are on the math team, the teachers, some of the administrators, phenomenal, did a terrific job of pulling them off. We've already seen some results, so that was great.
A lot of it has to do with the leadership of Dr. McDermott, bringing us together and getting us that central experience and driving for central. So
question back there?
I just have 2 minutes on the tape.
We're going to lose the tape. So if you want to say something that's on tape, do it now. If you don't want to be on tape, you want to say something, wait a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you very much.